So, good morning to whoever is watching, and to you, Sir ATM. This is my Jacto presentation, and it is presented by me, Nathaniel A. Lucero, and I have two topics. First is DIOSDADO Macapagal Sr. Topics to be discussed. So, who is DIOSDADO Macapagal Sr., his life background, his educational attainment, events before he became the president, um, his becoming the president, after his term as the president, and his death. Who is Diosdado P. Macapagal Sr.? He was the ninth President of the Philippines, born on September 28, 1910, and on April 21, and died on April 21, 1997. His life background. He was a native in Lubao, Pampanga, the third of a the third child of a poor family who grows pigs and accommodate boarders on their home for an extra income. He was also a reputed poet in Spanish language. His father's name is Urbano Macapagal E. Romero, and his mother's name is Romana Pangan Macapagal. His father was a poet who wrote in his local Pampangan language. He had two marriages. His first wife was named Rita de la Roa and had two kids with her named Chelo Macapagal Salgado and Arturo Macapagal. His first wife, Rita, died in 1943. 3 years later, his second, ay, 3 years after his first wife died, his second wife, he married his second wife named Dr. Magalina Macaraig, and also had two kids with her named Gloria Mapagal Arroyo and Diosdado Macapagal Jr. His educational attainment. He graduated as a valedictorian in elementary and as a salutatorian in high school. He enrolled at the Philippine Law School after finishing his pre-law course at the University of the Philippines. But because of his poor health and lack of money, he was forced to quit school after 2 years. And after he raised enough money, he continued his studies at the University of Santo Tomas. Events before he got elected as the president. After passing the bar exam, he got invited to join an American law firm as a practicing attorney. He was once assigned as the legal assistant of President Manuel L. Quezon, and in World War II, he worked as an assistant to President Jose P. Laurel, while secretly aiding the anti-Japanese forces. Not forces, resistance. After the war, he worked as an assistant attorney with one of the largest law firms in the country, Ross, Lawrence, Self, and Carrascosa. With the establishment of the independent Third Republic of the Philippines in 1946, he rejoined government service when President Manuel Rojas appointed him to the Department of Foreign Affairs as the head of its legal division. His presidency. In 1961, he got elected as the ninth president of the Philippines, promising an end to corruption. He worked to suppress graft and corruption and to stimulate the Philippine economy. He introduced the country's first land reform law and placed the peso on the free currency exchange market, and also liberalized foreign exchange import controls. After his term as the president, he attempted to rerun as the president but lost to Marcos. Following his loss to Marcos, he announced his retirement from politics. In his retirement, Pagal devoted much of his time to reading and writing and publishing his presidential memoir, authored several books about government and economics, and wrote a weekly column for the Manila Bulletin newspaper. His death, Marcos died. Diosdado Macapagal died of heart failure, pneumonia, and renal complication at the Makati Medical Center on April 21, 1997, and was buried at Alabingan ng mga bayani. Second topic, Ferdinand E. Marcos. Topics to be discussed. Who is he? His life background, his educational attainment, the assassination of Julio Nonondasan, his congressional career, his presidency, the martial law, his later years in power, and his death. Who is Ferdinand E. Marcos? He was the 10th president of the Philippines, born on September 11, 1917, and died on September 28, 1989. His life background. He was born on September 11, 1917, in the town of Sarat in Ilocos Norte. His father's name is Mariano Marcos, a lawyer and a congressman from Ilocos Norte. His father was executed by Filipino guerrilla in 1945 for being a Japanese propagandist and collaborator during the World War II. His mother's name is Josefa Marcos, a school teacher. His educational attainment. He studied law at the University of the Philippines in Manila, attending the College of Law. Excelling in both curricular and extracurricular activities, he became a member of the university's swimming, boxing, and wrestling teams. He was also an accomplished orator, debater, and writer for the student newspaper. While attending the UP College of Law, he became a member of Upsilon Sigma Phi, where he met his future colleagues in government and some of his staunchest critics. He graduated as cum laude and was a bar top-notcher, scoring 92.35% of the exam. Received his Doctor of Laws (LLD) degree in 1967 from Central Philippine University. The assassination of Julio Nalundasan. So, who is Julio Nalundasan? Julio Nalundasan was his father's political rival and was killed with a single shot in the head in, in his home in Bataak on September 21, 1935, the day after he had defeated um, Marcos's father a second time for a seat in the National Assembly. In 1938, Ferdinand E. Marcos, was prosecuted for murder, and he was not the only one who was accused to murder, but also his uncles Pio Marcos and Quirino Lizardo. According to the two witnesses, the four had conspired to assassinate Nalundasan, with Ferdinand Marcos eventually pulling the trigger. In late January 1939, they were finally denied bail. He was to receive a death penalty, but appealed to the Supreme Court, and actually he won. And then the Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision on October 22, 1940, acquitting the Marcos family of all charges except contempt. His congressional career. Marcos ran for his father's old post as representative of the Second District of Ilocos Norte and won three consecutive terms, serving in the House of Representatives from 1949 to 1959. This was after the World War II. Marcos joined the liberal wing that split from Nacionalista Party, which eventually became the Liberal Party. He eventually became the Liberal Party's spokesman on economic matters and was made chairman of the House of Neophytes Bloc. After he served as a member of the House of the Representatives for three terms, Marcos won his Senate seat in the elections in 1959. He became the executive vice president of the Liberal Party in and served as the party president from 1961 to 1964. From 1963 to 1965, he was the Senate president. His presidency. Marcos won as the 10th president of the Philippines on December 30, 1965, after he beat the Liberal President DIOSDADO Macapagal. During his first term, he had made progress in agriculture and industry and education. Yet, he his administration was troubled by increasing student demonstrations and violent urban guerrilla activities. And also, he was the first president to serve a second term. The martial law. On September 21, 1972, Marcos imposed martial law in the Philippines. Holding that communist and subversive forces have precipitated the crisis, he acted swiftly. Opposition politicians were jailed, and the armed forces became an arm of the regime. Martial law was opposed by political leaders, notably Benigno Aquino Jr., who was jailed and had detention for almost 8 years. Church leaders and, and others also criticized Marcos for this. In the provinces, Maoists, Communists, NPA, and Muslim separatists, notably the MNLF, undertook guerrilla activities intended to bring down the central government. But under the martial law, the president had the absolute authority, including the abilities to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. In January of 1981, Marcos announced the end of martial law but continued to rule as an authoritarian. And he won the election of the newly created post of president against token opposition in June 1981. His presidencies later in power. Marcos' later years in power was ruined by out-of-control government corruption, economic stagnation, the steady widening of economic inequalities between the rich and the poor, and the steady growth of communist guerrilla rebellion activities in the rural areas of the Philippines. By 1983, his health was starting to fail, and the opposition to his rule was growing. Digno Aquino Jr. returned to Manila on August 21, 1983, hoping to provide an alternative to both Marcos and the increasingly powerful NPA, and was shot dead as he stepped off the airplane. The assassination was seen as the work of the government and touched off massive anti-government protests. An independent commission appointed by Marcos concluded in 1984 that high military officers were responsible for Aquino's assassination. To reassert his mandate, Marcos called for presidential election to be held in 1986. But a formidable political opponent was soon emerged in Aquino's widow, Corazon Aquino, who became the presidential candidate of the opposition. It was widely asserted that Marcos only managed to defeat Aquino and retain the presidency in the election of February 7, 1986, only through massive voting fraud on the part of his supporters. Deeply discredited at home and abroad by this dubious electoral victory, Marcos held fast to his presidency as the Philippine military split between supporters of his and Aquino's legitimate right to presidency. A tense standoff that ensued between the two sides ended only when Marcos fled to the country on February 25, 1986, at U.S. urging. He went into he went into exile in Hawaii, where he remained until his death. His death. Marcos died in September 28, 1989, on Honolulu, Hawaii, in U.S. The cause of cardiac arrest at Saint Francis Medical Center after a long battle with his heart, lung, and kidney ailments. So that was all. Thank you for watching.